It's a hot and humid evening at the start of the Memorial Day weekend, and a 5-year-old boy has mysteriously vanished from his mother's sight at a local carnival. A massive search ensues until the wee hours of the morning, then continues at the crack of daylight. After several more hours of hundreds of officials and volunteers' exhaustive searching, authorities determine that any further efforts are futile. The boy is simply not there. As his grieving or not-so-grieving mother offers up wildly confusing stories, authorities grow suspicious. Then, years later, she resurfaces in an encounter that's so bonkers, Hollywood would have rejected it for being too unbelievable. Welcome back to Crime A to Z, where we detail cases and criminals from their very beginning, until well after other reporting ends. Today, we'll be talking about the case of Michelle Lodzinski, a case where we looked at each other in disbelief so many times that we actually lost count. The case reminded us very much of the Susan Smith case, with its tearless pleas and baffling deception. Come along on this wild ride with us and determine for yourself what you think happened. And don't miss this case's Z section for its shocking surprise ending. Thank you to Fenati Cat 1 for recommending this case. It was a roller coaster ride, for sure. And just a reminder that if you end up liking this video, we always genuinely appreciate you hitting like and subscribe. And it also really helps us if you share. We appreciate you. Let's go. Michelle Lodzinski was born and raised in New Jersey along with her older brother and sister and a younger brother. It was when Michelle was 16 and visiting her older brother in the nearby city of Walker, New Jersey, that Michelle met and began dating George Wiltsey. A year later, on August 6, 1985, when Michelle was 17, the pair welcomed a son, Timothy, who the family lovingly called Timmy. The relationship quickly crumbled, however, and 6 months after having Timmy, Michelle and the baby left and moved in with her sister in South Amboy, New Jersey. Having dropped out of high school, Michelle would take on various low-paying jobs, sometimes 2 at a time, and eventually move out of her sister's home and into her own apartment. Juggling work, her social life, and her son, Michelle struggled, relying on family and friends to help her watch young Timmy, and facing disappointment from 2 serious relationships who ultimately decided they were not ready to become stepfathers. At the beginning of 1990, when Michelle's sister and brother-in-law, who were her primary source of childcare help, moved to Florida, it became even more difficult for Michelle. She was late for work often and would bring Timmy with her sometimes. And once Timmy began school himself, he was also tardy or absent frequently, with the school reporting 63 tardies and 25 absences in his first year. But despite the challenges Michelle faced, she was widely regarded as a loving, caring mother who was devoted to her young son, making sure he had everything he needed, saving up enough money to send him to St. Mary's private school for his kindergarten year, and taking him on vacations and special outings whenever she could. It was on one of those outings that the sinister basis of this story began to take shape. It was Friday, May 25, 1991, the start of the Memorial Day weekend. 23-year-old Michelle Lodzinski had made plans to take 5-year-old Timmy to the local carnival that was in town in nearby Sayreville. The plan for the day was to take Timmy shopping to pick out clothes that would go with the kindergarten graduation gown Michelle had just purchased for him the week prior. Michelle planned to complete the shopping in the morning, then take both Timmy and her infant niece to the carnival in the evening. When evening came around, however, Michelle headed to the carnival without the infant niece and without calling the infant's mother. She arrived at the carnival at about 7 p.m. that evening. Sometime around 7:30 p.m., Michelle ran into her 13-year-old niece, Jennifer Blair, along with Jennifer's friend. Michelle was looking around frantically and told the girls that she'd lost sight of Timmy when she went to concessions to buy a soda. The 3 soon reported that the boy was missing to the Sayreville police officer on site at the carnival. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, the officer called for backup. Additional officers arrived and joined in the search for the missing boy. The carnival was shut down, and despite exhaustive search efforts by the large volume of police officers, firefighters, trained dogs, and numerous volunteers that joined in, there was no sign of Timmy at the carnival or in the surrounding area. The search continued until 2 a.m. when it was finally called off for the night. The search for Timmy resumed the next morning at 5:30 a.m. with over 300 people searching the park and surrounding neighborhoods. Helicopters and diving units were deployed, leaving no stone unturned. By noon, the Sayreville Police Department was convinced that given their exhaustive search, the boy was not in the park and there was nothing further they could do. So, they called off the search. Police had already searched Michelle's car the day of the disappearance in search of any clues, but found nothing. They searched it again this second day, along with her home, still finding nothing. 4,000 flyers were circulated throughout the community, and police continued to follow up on leads called into the station. Timmy's father, George Wiltsey, gets ruled out as a suspect since he was at home in Iowa at the time. Police interviewed carnival workers and visitors from that day to see if anyone recalled seeing the boy. 2 witnesses as well as a group of teenage boys were confident they saw someone who matched the description of Timmy before the time of the disappearance. One witness said she saw and even had a conversation with Michelle prior to the disappearance, and there was no one with her. Police searched Michelle's apartment, but like with her car, found nothing helpful. They also placed a tap on her phone to record the phone numbers of all incoming calls. They interviewed her former boyfriends, Timmy's father, and anyone of interest. Timmy's face appeared on milk cartons displaying missing children, and he was even featured on America's Most Wanted twice, including just days after his disappearance. Police are initially baffled by this child disappearing among such a large crowd of people undetected, but once they begin interviewing Michelle, they begin to form suspicions. Michelle originally reported to police that at about 7:15 p.m., she left Timmy by the side of a trailer while she went to buy a soda from concessions. Then, when she turned around, he was gone. She also gave police an account of their activities prior to going to the carnival, which included playing kickball and visiting the petting zoo at Homedale Park that afternoon. However, according to the Homedale Park police, the lot where she said they parked was closed that day. Police interviewed friends and neighbors and couldn't find anyone who had seen her son that night. The last time anyone who knew him had seen Timmy was around 11 a.m. on the morning that he disappeared. When police interviewed Michelle about a week after the disappearance on June 4th, she reiterated her account that she lost sight of Timmy when she went to purchase a soda and that she had no idea where he was. But when they interviewed her again just 2 days later on June 6th, while she began by stating she didn't know where Timmy was, after a few hours she changed her story. She reported that she saw an older man take Timmy off of a ride and walk him to a younger man. She said she yelled out, but the older man told her to stay away or the boy is going to get injured. The detectives pressed further and she said, "You wanted to hear something, so I told you." She returned later that day and said she made up the story. That would be just the beginning of a bizarre string of stories. With her changing story, police focused in on Michelle. They called her back in the very next day for further interrogation with the same detectives, and she didn't disappoint. This time, her account changed even more dramatically. She told detectives that while Timmy was on a ride at the carnival, she was approached by a woman whom she knew by the name of Ellen. She said she knew Ellen because Ellen used to cash welfare checks at the bank where Michelle had worked as a teller a few years back. She claimed that she was also a go-go dancer at a local club. She said Ellen was accompanied by 2 men and a young girl, and offered to watch Timmy while Michelle purchased a soda. When Michelle returned, however, Timmy was gone, as were Ellen, the 2 men, and the young girl. Michelle explaining to detectives that she had withheld this information about Ellen out of concern for Timmy's safety. Given Michelle's ever-evolving story, police decided to enlist the help of her boyfriend, Fred Bruno. They had him secretly record her in an attempt to get her to share what truly happened. But they came up empty. Michelle told him the Ellen story of the moment, that she was currently telling police. So a week after their last interview with her, they called her in for another morning interview. Michelle began by sticking to her story about Ellen offering to watch Timmy during her soda run, but this time she added a twist. As she was walking to concessions, she said that one of the men came and put his arm around her shoulder and threatened her with a knife, telling her, "Timmy has a pretty face. You wouldn't want to do anything to mess that up. Keep walking and shut up." The detective pushed back. He told her that her account didn't make sense. If they had Timmy, why wouldn't they just take him instead of coming back to threaten her? She was already leaving Timmy with them. Why would they alert her that they were taking him? He asked her why she didn't yell out since she was in the middle of a busy carnival. She said that she was going to, but then the other man held a knife to Timmy too. The detectives weren't buying it. Otherwise, this would have been her original story. So, one of the detectives devised a scheme. He tells Michelle that he believes her because they've been tracking a kidnapping ring out of Berkeley that operates exactly as she's describing. He told her they say they're going to return the child to a specific location, but tell the parents they cannot tell the police if they want to get their child back. He said he knows they have told her the same thing, and that's why she's been lying to the police. She bought it. She agreed with the detective and said they told her she might get Timothy back in a month if she did not say anything. The detective told her he needed to know the location they told her. She said it was in the woods in an abandoned building near a tree, but when he pushed for a location of the building, she clammed up. And when another detective tried to break the silence by saying she was lying, she abruptly ended the interview and stormed out, telling them to charge her or she's leaving. Detectives were even more suspicious of Michelle after that. No innocent mother, concerned about finding her missing son, would ever go along with such a story. She'd be interrogated 2 more times, reciting her most recent story, and typically storming out by the end before she refused to participate in any more interviews. But despite Michelle's conflicting accounts, authorities had no concrete evidence to suggest that she was involved in Timmy's disappearance. So they continued pursuing any leads, until they finally caught a break. 5 months after Timmy's disappearance, a nature enthusiast school teacher was exploring the marshlands in the Raritan Center Business Park, just across the river from Sayreville. While exploring, he came across a small Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle sneaker, which is what Timmy was said to be wearing when he went missing. The teacher was aware of that, so he brought the shoe to the Sayreville Police Department. The shoe was shown to Michelle, who told police that it did not look like her son's shoe. So, the police stored it away. Meanwhile, the teacher, waiting to hear word about whether the shoe was connected to the missing child or not, grew impatient after weeks of not hearing anything back from the police. So, he reported his find to a local newspaper. The shoe was a front-page story the following morning, sparking renewed interest from the FBI and triggering forensic testing. This renewed interest and media attention also triggered Michelle to call the police station and tell them that the shoe may, indeed, have been Timmy's. She had previously provided the shoebox that the shoes came in. The discovered shoe matched the specifications on the box. It was Timmy's shoe. Police conducted a search of the area where the shoe was found, but didn't uncover any further evidence. A few months after Timmy's shoe was found, the moment everyone hoped would never come, came. Nearly 11 months after Timmy's disappearance, the FBI regrouped. They decided to re-explore every avenue they had already pursued in case they had missed something. One of the strategies was to research the marshy area where Timmy's shoe was found. And to everyone's surprise, nearly as soon as the search began, they found the matching shoe, just 30 yards from where the first shoe was found 6 months earlier. No one could answer why the shoe wasn't found during the original search. They continued searching and ultimately discovered the skull of a small child, along with 11 other bones. They also found a shovel, a pillowcase, a large blue blanket, and a few other items. Timmy's remains were so decomposed that his cause of death was not able to be determined, and dental records were needed to identify him. Detectives informed Michelle that they had found Timothy's remains. According to them, she had no visible response. The family and community were heartbroken. The findings triggered a hunt for Timmy's killer. Police interviewed Timmy's father, but ruled him out since he was nowhere near the area at the time of the disappearance. They interviewed Michelle's ex-boyfriends, but none were considered suspects. Ellen, the mystery woman, was never found, despite the FBI's extensive resources and exhaustive search for her, including investigating every person named Ellen on welfare, all of whom Michelle said were not her Ellen, based on photo lineups. None of the people investigated sustained prolonged suspicion. Instead, their prime suspect was Michelle Lodzinski. Why? For starters, her ever-changing story. She also failed 2 FBI polygraph tests shortly after Timmy went missing, frequently asking the administrators how she was doing. In addition, many law enforcement officers, those close to her, and even the public felt that on several occasions, Michelle didn't show appropriate emotion for the mother of a missing child, at times outright laughing.
What was the time period from when you last saw Tim and then turned around and he was gone?
Had to be about 2 minutes or so. It was like they were take my money out of my pocketbook, paid the guy, gave me my change back, soda, and then turned around and he was gone.
Okay, so within this 2-minute period, Tim disappeared.
Yeah.
Michelle's position was that everyone is waiting to see a grieving mother on TV break down, crying, hysterical, because the public, they thrive on that stuff. During a press conference where Michelle was asking for prayers for her son, reporters asked her why she had shown little to no emotion about her missing son, to which she replied, "I don't show emotion in the public, and I don't think I should have to because someone wants me to." Then, there was the fund. Before Timmy's remains were found, the surrounding communities never gave up hope. Volunteers formed a fund called Friends of Timmy to raise money to help find him. Michelle initially welcomed the efforts and even sat on the fund's board. The first fundraiser was held at Timmy's Catholic school, and upon Michelle's recommendation, was a Chippendale dancer event. The event faced backlash, considered inappropriate for both a Catholic school event as well as a fundraiser to help find a missing child. Despite the backlash, Michelle insisted the next fundraiser also be a Chippendale dancer event. The board rejected the idea, and Michelle quit the board. She then had an attorney send a letter to the fund which existed exclusively to find her son, prohibiting them from using any photos or likenesses of Timmy in their efforts to find him. Another suspicious finding was that the marsh where Timmy's remains were found happened to be right behind an office park where Michelle previously worked, a fact that she failed to mention during her initial interviews. Also, a few months after Timmy went missing, Michelle took a girls' trip with a friend to the Bahamas. She was recognized by 2 off-duty state troopers who also happened to be vacationing there. And, lastly, police received an anonymous, typed letter on the day that Timmy's remains were found. It named the man responsible for Timmy's death. It claimed the man had a grudge against Michelle and that he had asked for help killing Michelle and her little boy. Investigators noted that Michelle's name was misspelled, using only 1 L instead of 2. This immediately made law enforcement suspect Michelle herself of writing the letter, intentionally misspelling her name in an attempt to divert suspicion from herself, especially since the man that was implicated was an ex-boyfriend that had helped the FBI complete their behavioral analysis of her. The FBI analyzed the letter and checked it for DNA and fingerprints, and while they did find DNA, it was not Michelle's or anyone's they were aware of. Despite law enforcement's strong suspicions of Michelle, with no physical evidence linking her to her son's murder, the case grew cold. Michelle moved on with her life and moved in with her brother in a nearby town. She flew pretty much under the radar. Until 2 years later, in 1994, when Michelle would end up in the news again in the most unexpected way possible. Michelle had been kidnapped. For some time before she was kidnapped, Michelle had been telling friends and family that she was being stalked. Then one day, her brother found Michelle's car with its door open and engine still running, her glasses and purse still inside. Authorities searched her car, but didn't find anything worth noting with the exception of one item: the business card of an FBI agent with a note written on the back, "See you soon. It's not over." But this disappearance would not involve an extensive search. The following day, police received a call from Michelle herself. She said she'd been released by her kidnappers in Detroit, Michigan, over 600 miles or almost 1,000 kilometers away. She claimed 2 FBI agents approached her at gunpoint, put a blanket over her head, then brought her to Detroit, where they released her. The FBI didn't believe her story for a second. The business card found in her car was a fake. There was no one by that name at the FBI. They'd later find that she had the cards printed herself. They had the call that she made to the police department traced. It was made from a payphone near a Greyhound bus station. Digging a little deeper, they found that Michelle had purchased a Greyhound bus ticket from Newark to Detroit. She was not kidnapped. She took the bus. Detectives didn't know what to make of this hoax, but it confirmed their suspicions about Michelle's level of integrity and willingness to lie. If she would stage a kidnapping for herself, What else would she do? Many of Michelle's family members were furious. The roller coaster ride she was taking everyone on was both selfish and suspicious. Michelle pleaded guilty to making false statements to the FBI and fraudulent use of a government seal. She was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest and 3 years of probation. And she would later spend a day in jail after stealing a laptop from her employer, then giving it to her then-boyfriend as a Christmas gift. She got busted when he had it serviced, which revealed that it was stolen. After that, Michelle decided it was time to start fresh. She moved to Minnesota, where her other brother lived. There she got married, had 2 sons, then within 3 years, divorced and relocated to Florida, moving in with her older sister. She kept photos of Timmy in the house to let her other sons know that they had a brother. All the while, the case of Timmy's murder remained cold. An occasional tip would come in that the county prosecutors would follow up on, but each lead led to a dead end. After one particular false lead in the early 2010s, an investigator felt it might be time again to review the investigation, looking at everything from a fresh perspective. They realized that the evidence found along with Timmy's remains had never been shown to people close to Michelle, particularly the blanket and the pillowcase. So, they decided to focus on the blanket since there was little chance the young boy would have been carrying a large blanket around a carnival on what was the hottest Memorial Day weekend on record at the time. So they surmised that the blanket was taken from Michelle's home and used to cover Timmy after his death. Detectives determined that if they could link the blanket to Michelle, it would be powerful evidence. They reviewed photos of the inside of Michelle's apartment prior to her son's disappearance, and while there were some blankets present, none matched the blanket found in the marsh. So, over 20 years later, detectives began contacting anyone who may have had knowledge of the contents of Michelle's apartment at the time. Nearly everyone they contacted did not recognize the blanket as one that was in Michelle's home, with one exception. Michelle's niece, Jennifer Blair, now Jennifer Blair Dilcher. Upon Michelle's urging, Jennifer had moved to Florida to be near Michelle, since Jennifer had been struggling with some substance abuse issues. Michelle helped Jennifer get into a detox facility and promised to watch Jennifer's children while she was getting cleaned up. However, once Michelle had Jennifer's kids, she decided that it was best for them to not be returned to Jennifer, determining her unfit. So while Jennifer was recovering in the facility, Michelle contacted Jennifer's in-laws and handed the children over to Jennifer's mother-in-law, who took the kids back to New Jersey. Jennifer considered it the ultimate betrayal, especially after all the years of support she'd given Michelle. Now estranged from Michelle, detectives contacted Jennifer and asked her to try to rekindle her relationship with Michelle and solicit information about the murder. That approach didn't work. So next they asked her to come in to see if she recognized something. Jennifer arrived at the police station, not knowing what they wanted to show her. When she entered the room, there was a dirty, tattered blanket laying on the table. Immediately recognizing it as a blanket from Timmy's house where she babysat so many times when she was 13 or 14, she became emotional. Now that they had a witness placing the blanket at the home, on August 6, 2014, which would have been Timmy's 29th birthday, police arrested Michelle and charged her with the murder of her son. The criminal trial began on March 16, 2016, nearly 25 years after Timmy was murdered. With the blanket being the only evidence turning the case against Michelle into a viable one, and only the single witness tying the blanket to the house, the prosecution's connection was limited. But a few months before the trial, they caught a break. 2 other women who had babysat Timmy saw the photos of the blanket and stated that the blanket did indeed come from the home. One of those witnesses was 15 to 17 when she babysat Timmy a few times. The other was 14, again having babysat a few times 25 years prior.
Okay. Can you tell the jury, do you recognize this item?
Yes,
What do you recognize it to be?
a blanket that was in Michelle's home in order.
The prosecution contended that Timmy had become a burden to the young mother, struggling to provide care while maintaining a social life, bouncing from job to job, and unable to find a steady, satisfying relationship. They focused on the changes in Michelle's story, her unemotional behavior throughout the time her son was missing, and initially not acknowledging she worked near where her son was found. Among the witnesses they presented was the woman who said she spoke to Michelle at the carnival and never saw a child with her. nor did Michelle mention any child.
I witnessed and that I was there, and there was no child with her.
They also called Michelle's ex-fiancé. He testified that he wasn't surprised when Timothy was attacked by the German Shepherd dog next door, knowing that Michelle would still leave Timothy outside alone with the dog, despite his warnings for her to not do so. The attack required 72 stitches to Timmy's face. He also testified that Michelle reminded him of an older sister watching her little brother, bothered by the responsibility, and feeling like she was being pressured into having to watch him. He canceled the engagement after he considered whether Michelle would be a good wife, mother, and partner in life, and his answer was no to all three. He became engaged to someone else about 1 month before Timmy disappeared. The prosecution also called Michelle's brother's girlfriend at the time, who testified that on one occasion when she was watching Timmy, Michelle had to work late and instructed her to send Timmy home with a man the girlfriend did not know. But Timmy didn't want to go with him, which made Michelle angry. So when Michelle arrived to pick Timmy up, she pulled him down the stairs and pushed him into the car. She also testified that Michelle once commented that she was a weekend mother and not made for this and that, although Michelle was supposed to pick her infant daughter up to go to the fair that fateful day, she never showed up or even called. Michelle's defense attorney argued that Michelle loved Timmy more than life itself, and that the case was wholly a character assassination.
Michelle Lodzinski is not the monster they want to paint her as to you.
They argued that all the evidence was circumstantial, without a single confession. No DNA, no fibers, no murder weapon, no physical evidence whatsoever linking his client to the case. He outlined how deeply Michelle cared for her son, and how her activities just prior to Timmy's disappearance were hardly indicative of someone who would have killed him, including clothes shopping, and even buying his graduation gown. They argued that the witnesses to the blanket, the sole piece of evidence that brought Michelle to trial, were either testifying out of spite for Michelle or biased by the extreme media exposure the case was getting. And the defense had one final ace they felt raised doubt about Michelle's guilt. Michelle's defense had received a call from an ex-convict named Damien Dowdle. He reported that a cellmate of his, Bernard Joseph McShane, had confessed to abducting a child from a park, then strangling him when the child began to scream.
He told me that while he was out, he was at a park with a big event going nearby, and while he was at that park, a boy had gone into the woods, and there was some sort of an argument, and the boy went into the woods. The kid began screaming and crying, and he got concerned that people were nearby and there was a search going on under for this kid. So he wanted to shut the kid up, and he strangled him.
Dowdle said he had been reading about Timothy's case and found it eerily similar to what McShane had told him. Dowdle's claim was backed by the fact that he had reported the admission to police back in 1991 when McShane first told him about it. The prosecution called McShane himself to the stand. McShane, not surprisingly, denied Dowdle's claim. And the prosecution didn't offer any evidence that McShane was even in New Jersey at the time of the crime.
Did you tell him that you hit and strangled the little boy?
No.
And that you killed him?
No.
The case rested and the jury deliberated. They found Michelle Lodzinski guilty of first-degree murder. The sentencing guidelines for her crime call for between 30 years in prison to life. Her attorney fought for the least amount of time, arguing, "I'm sure Timmy would not want to impose a life sentence on his mother." On January 5, 2017, 49-year-old Michelle Lodzinski was sentenced to the minimum 30 years in prison. The judge remarked that she will be old and gray by the time she is released. After Michelle's conviction, an additional attorney joined her defense team, appalled that the case was even brought to trial with what he considered zero evidence. They appealed the conviction. Their appeals were denied until the case was finally set to be heard by the New Jersey Supreme Court. Of the 7 Supreme Court justices, one recused himself, having worked in the office of the New Jersey U.S. Attorney at the time Timmy disappeared. With the 6 remaining judges, the appeal decision was split 3-3. Normally, when there is such a split in New Jersey courts, the conviction verdict would stand, but Michelle's attorneys argued that that split violated her right to due process and requested that the Supreme Court reconsider the case. It responded by borrowing a judge from the lower court to serve as a tiebreaker. In that unprecedented move, a tiebreaker judge ruled in Michelle's favor, with the final ruling stating that no murder conviction has ever been upheld on such a dearth of evidence. Two key factors in the majority decision were, first, that they had serious doubts about the blanket testimony and its witnesses, and second, in order to convict on a murder charge, it has to be proven that the person knowingly and purposely committed the murder, an impossibility since the cause of death remained unknown. They additionally noted that the prosecution's arguments surrounding the struggles of a single mother were not only not credible, but a gender stereotype about single working mothers, noting that it is not uncommon for a 23-year-old single mother raising a child on her own to have financial and social challenges. That singularly unremarkable scenario hardly indicates a motive to murder one's child. So, on December 28, 2021, the same evening the verdict was handed down, Michelle Lodzinski's conviction was thrown out, and she was released from prison, having served 5 years since she was sentenced.
Just grateful for all the people that helped me and stood by my side to get me home to my family and friends. I want to go home and just see my kids.
Given double jeopardy, which prohibits someone from being tried for the same matter twice, Michelle can never be tried again for Timmy's murder, even if new evidence surfaces. Reactions from those around Michelle were mixed. Her attorney stated, "This was a great day for the rule of law and the principles that matter to us, that convictions have to be based on evidence and not based on speculation or emotion." Michelle's younger brother, Michael, who had come to believe in Michelle's guilt, stated, "Justice Albin and his group believe they have righted some great wrong today, but all they did was rob justice from a little boy. Shame on them." The three judges who unsuccessfully dissented lamented that an unsatisfied defendant could be granted a new hearing, despite her rights having been fully protected during both her trial and appeal. They considered the decision a disservice to our jury system and grave injustice to the victim, 5-year-old Timothy Wiltsey. Jurors from the previous trial were furious, with a group of them stating, "How dare they set aside our verdict? These judges have failed in their duty to uphold the law and achieve justice for little Timmy Wiltsey." Michelle has remained private since her release, and multiple reports assume she has returned to her family, including her 2 sons in Florida, resuming her life there. We look forward to hearing what you think about this case. Its lack of forensic evidence of nearly any kind certainly makes you wonder, given that police collected hair, DNA, carpet fibers, thoroughly searched Michelle's home, car, everything. But the massive amount of circumstantial evidence is impossible to ignore as well. Outside of some of Michelle's family, we scarcely came across reports of anyone who didn't feel that she at least knew what happened, if not committed the murder herself. Only a very small number of people likely know for sure. What do you think? Guilty? Innocent? Somewhere in between? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, if you like how we presented this case, we genuinely appreciate it if you can hit like, share, and of course, subscribe so you don't miss a single video.